This is Sunrise, our top stories. Fears of the new nuclear test. A 6.3 magnitude tremor is felt near North Korea's weapons site. The country is set to make a special announcement in the next half hour.
Brexit chaos. Labour accused of trying to defeat the government's moves to leave the European Union, as the Prime Minister tries to prevent a rebellion from within her own party.
A lot of love in Texas. President Trump praises rescuers on his second visit to areas hit by Storm Harvey.
12 British people arrested as police uncover an alleged drug-dealing ring in Magaluf and find tens of thousands of pounds worth of cocaine.
Back to Earth with a bump. Record-breaking NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson touches down in Kazakhstan. A very good morning to you. This is Sunrise. Many thanks indeed for joining us. We start with breaking news this morning and the fears that North Korea has carried out another nuclear test. South Korean military believe a 6.3 magnitude tremor felt on the country was its sixth military test. Japan says the tremors were at least 10 times as powerful as previous nuclear tests. North Korea says it will make a special announcement at 7:30 this morning.
Well, the tremor occurred in Kilju County in the northeast of the country, near to the Fahnbulleh nuclear test site. Last night, Pyongyang claimed its leader had inspected a hydrogen bomb being loaded onto an intercontinental ballistic missile, which could have the range to reach US territory.
Well, Sky's Katie Salo joins us now from Beijing. So, Katie, we're expecting a special announcement from the North Koreans at about 7:30 this morning.
Yeah, this will come at 3 p.m. in the afternoon Pyongyang time, which works out at 7:30 a.m. UK time.
North Korea has not been deterred by President Trump's threats of retaliation. All eyes now on the White House. Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
Brexit Secretary David Davis has accused Labour of threatening to delay, bog down and defeat the government's repeal bill. Meanwhile, Downing Street's Talking Down reports that the Prime Minister is prepared to pay a €50 billion divorce bill to the EU over 3 years. Well, let's cross live now to our political correspondent Tom Rayner, who's in Westminster for us. And Tom, the Prime Minister under pressure here from all sides.
Yeah, well, Parliament returns next week and it will be all eyes on the EU withdrawal bill.
OK, thanks very much for that update there.
Now, President Trump has returned to flood-hit Texas with a pledge to try and make it better in the wake of Hurricane Harvey, where the death toll from the storm has now reached 44.
Meeting with some of the thousands of people who've been affected by the devastation in the worst-hit city of Houston, Mr. Trump praised the relief effort, saying he'd seen a lot of love and a lot of happiness. Our US correspondent Cordelia Lynch reports now from Houston.
Donald Trump embraces the role of comforter-in-chief. Has just begun. Cordelia Lynch, Sky News, Houston, Texas.
12 people have been arrested after police smashed an alleged drugs ring at the Spanish resort of Magaluf on the island of Mallorca.
Yeah, police seized 3 kilos of high-purity cocaine and more than €100,000 in cash. It's understood the group was supplying drugs to partygoers on the island. Well, Sky's Charlotte Lomas is here with the details. Charlotte, what more do we know?
Well, it's understood that this cocaine was actually bundled in cling film and stashed in shoe boxes. And this is 3 kilograms of pure cocaine, we believe, as well as a variety of other drugs, including ecstasy, and also around £100,000 in cash. And this was all seized in a raid. We can show you some footage. It's been released from the Spanish Civil Guard that shows police wearing helmets, body armour, carrying guns as a helicopter hovers overhead. And this raid was part of Operation Tatum, in which, as you said, 12 British people have been arrested. That's in total 14 people were arrested, and that includes a Spanish and someone from the Dominican Republic. And police say that these suspects were part of a criminal gang. They were alleged to be selling drugs to tourists in nightclubs in the Spanish resort of Magaluf. And the Spanish police have said they've been helped in this by the UK crime agency, and it is also in connection to another raid last July where 4 people were arrested and 4.8 kilograms of cocaine was seized.
Sounds like a major coup for investigators. Charlotte, for now, thank you.
A Yemeni leader of al-Qaeda has called for attacks on Myanmar's authorities in support of minority Muslims, as tens of thousands continue to flee to Bangladesh to escape the violence. Security officials and insurgents from the Rohingya ethnic minority are accusing each other of burning down villages and committing atrocities in Myanmar's Rakhine state. Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson has called on the country's leader Aung San Suu Kyi to end the persecution of the Muslim minority.
700 homes around Los Angeles have been evacuated as one of the city's largest ever wildfires continues to rage. Hundreds of firefighters have been battling the flames, which have torched more than 5,000 acres of bush and destroyed at least 3 homes.
Touchdown.
Incredible story here. NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson is back on Earth, landing in Kazakhstan with 2 others after a record-setting space flight.
Yeah, she now holds a record for the longest time cumulatively spent in space. Wait for it, 655 days by an American or a woman.
Yes, the 57-year-old spent the last 9.5 months in space on her 3rd mission to the International Space Station, doing 10 spacewalks, more than any other woman.
Yeah, and she is the only female astronaut to have commanded the International Space Station twice. Astronaut Jack Fisher and Russian cosmonaut Fyodor Yurkin were also on board the Russian capsule.
Well, we're joined live now from California by Research Associate at James Martin Center for Non-Profitarian Studies, Shay Cotton. First of all, it's been a very quick turnaround for the North Koreans. Just last year they tested an H-bomb. Now they claim they've got an ICBM. And this new test now, have they managed to gain such advancement with so many sanctions?
Yes, it appears they have. This latest test, we're not exactly sure how big it is, but it's definitely the largest one that we've ever seen them do before.
Sure. And how worried should we be, do you think?
Well, it's definitely a concerning situation, but I don't think that North Korea is exactly ready to deploy this weapon yet. And even when they do, the situation isn't that much changed than it was before. North Korea knows that any sort of conflict would result in its destruction, and the U.S. and its allies know that any conflict would be very costly for them as well. So it's likely that we'll kind of remain in this status quo sort of standoff.
It's not confirmed yet, is it? But it seems like this is going to be its 6th missile test. There have been economic sanctions on North Korea, but those don't seem to be working.
They've worked in some regards, but they've hurt North Korea's economy. But no, they haven't stopped North Korea from gaining this technology and continuing to advance it, and it hasn't dissuaded North Korea from this path at all.
And we've got this press conference apparently that's going to happen at 7:30 our time here in the UK. What do you think we can expect from that?
We can probably expect North Korea to give a little bit more information about the test, what they think that its yield was, and they might also say whether or not we can expect more of these tests soon. In addition, we'll probably get some just general chest thumping from their side.
And what are the options for President Donald Trump here? Because he's come out, he's ramped up the rhetoric, but they don't seem to be responding.
No, heightening the rhetoric isn't going to help. It hasn't helped at all so far. Unfortunately for Donald Trump, really his only options are to try and negotiate with North Korea at this point, because there really is no military option that's not enormously costly at this point. And sanctions really aren't working. So pretty much negotiating in some way to try and cool things down is about really the only option he has left to do.
But a man who says that he will respond with fire and fury doesn't sound like the kind of person who is willing to negotiate with North Korea.
Not really. I mean, he came into office saying that he was a deal maker and would be willing to sit down and have burgers with Kim Jong-un. So for all we know, he might wake up tomorrow and completely pivot on this. Or this test might cause him to pivot and say, well, we're going to have to negotiate something on this. But it's difficult to say.
And for those in Japan and South Korea, how concerned should they be?
Well, in some ways, things really haven't changed for them. Japan and South Korea have both been within range of North Korean missiles and its weapons for quite some time. Sure, now North Korea can deliver a much more devastating weapon to them, but overall, the strategic situation hasn't changed too much. What they have to worry about is potentially fear that the U.S. won't be there in a crisis. Because the U.S. doesn't want to trade Seoul for Los Angeles or Tokyo for Seattle, something like that. So that's what their main fear is going to be.
So what is it that Kim Jong-un actually wants from all this? What are his motivations?
His primary motivation is security. He wants to make sure that North Korea is going to stick around. He saw what happened in Iraq, where the U.S. got together an international coalition and toppled Saddam Hussein. He saw what happened in Libya, where Libya actually agreed to give up its pursuits of nuclear technology, and that resulted in eventually a domestic uprising, and that was backed by the U.S. and European allies, and that also led to his overthrow. So he sees nuclear weapons and his missile program as the ultimate insurance against either of those.
Okay, thanks very much for your expertise. Appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you for having me.
As you say with us on Sunrise, lots more to come, including... Hello there, welcome back. Let's have a look at all of the day's sport.
This sports bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Sorry.
For life insurance that rewards healthy living.
Good morning. 17-year-old Ben Woodburn scored the winner on his Wales debut to beat Austria and greatly improve their chances of qualifying for next year's World Cup. You can see more reaction to last night's World Cup qualifiers live now on Sky Sports News, and we're back later.
For life insurance that rewards healthy living. Vitality.
Well, let's see how the weather's looking. Apparently it's going to be an Indian summer. How is it looking this week?
I didn't say that. I didn't say it. Was that the Daily
According
Express?
to the Daily Express, yeah, September.
Learn from that. That is the message. No, Indian summer, I mean, you need to have some colder, frostier nights, and it's much later in the year, like October, November for an Indian summer. And I'll tell you something, the first bit of September looks very different. We've got some really, really disturbed weather heading our way. We've got some fronts anyway today, but towards the end of this week, wild and windy.
Hello there, very good morning to you. You're watching Sunrise.
Coming up, we'll have all your morning's papers with the broadcaster Anne Diamond and Brexit commissioning editor at The Telegraph, Asa Bennett.
But we start with breaking news this morning and the fears that North Korea has carried out another nuclear test. South Korean military believe the 6.3 magnitude tremor felt in the country was its sixth military test. Japan says the tremors were almost 10 times as powerful as previous nuclear tests.
Well, yes, the tremor occurred in the Kilju County in the northeast of the country, near to the Peggy nuclear test site. Last night, Pyongyang claimed its leader had inspected a hydrogen bomb being loaded onto an intercontinental ballistic missile, which could have the range to reach US territory.
Well, I just wanted to bring you this announcement from North Korean States TV.
분열 연쇄 반응 시발 조종 기술의 정밀성을 재확인하였으며
All eyes now on the White House. Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
Now we're going to bring you some breaking news now. In the last few minutes we've been hearing a press conference from North Korea, and they have confirmed that it successfully conducted a test of hydrogen bomb meant for intercontinental ballistic missile. Let's get more on this now. From Beijing, Sky's Katie Stallard is there for us. How concerned should we be by this news, Katie?
Well, let me fill you in firstly on these breaking lines that we're hearing out of Pyongyang. This was billed as a special announcement on North Korean state TV.
We want to talk about space now, and NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson is back on Earth, landing in Kazakhstan with 2 others after a record-setting space flight. In the studio with us is a senior research fellow with the Departments of Physics and Astronomy at University College London, Dr. Francisco Diego. Good to see you, Francisco. Loving the tie, first of all.
Thank you very much.
We can't underestimate what achievement this is by Peggy Whitson.
No, we cannot. She's an amazing woman. She has been in the space station 3 times. She has broken the record of a woman in space for more than 650 days already accumulated. She has done 10 spacewalks. She is the oldest woman in space at 57. And she has been performing all kinds of experiments and maintenance operations in these spacewalks outside of the space station. So it is amazing what she has achieved.
655 days in space. I mean, what effect is that going to have on her body when she's back home?
We have to remember this is accumulated in 3. And the first mission was 6 months. The second mission was about 6 months. This was the longest one, 9.5 months. And yes, they need, all these astronauts, they need 45 days to recover after they come back. And exactly, this is one of the points of doing this long stays in space, to know how the body reacts to these long stays in space. I must say that 9.5 months is more or less the time that we need to go to Mars. So the body that changes that she may have experienced here is more or less the same as we will have when we go all the way to Mars. And remember, when you go to Mars, you have to get off the spacecraft and start working. So you need your body in full power. Mind you, the gravity on Mars is only 1/3, but all these things need to be sorted out, and it's a long way to go still.
Yeah, what I love about these stories, anything related to the International Space Station, is the fact that you've got people from different parts of the world, different countries, all coming together for the greater good, for a common goal.
It is fascinating that we are seeing how science brings the communities together. I have to say, all these things that we see in space will not be possible without international collaboration. International collaboration is fundamental. It is fundamental for space exploration, space colonization, and I would like to see that international collaboration keeps going in further missions to the moon, to Mars and beyond in the future.
Francisco, many thanks indeed. A good, positive story about the greater common good. Thanks for coming in. Cheers.
Thank you.
Now, in the UK, Brexit Secretary David Davis has accused Labour of threatening to delay, bog down and defeat the government's repeal bill. That'll be presenting to Parliament this week. Meanwhile, Downing Street is talking down reports that Theresa May is prepared to pay a €50 billion divorce bill to the EU over 3 years.
President Trump has returned to flood-hit Texas with a pledge to try and make it better in the wake of Hurricane Harvey, meeting with some of the thousands of people who've been affected by the devastation in the worst-hit city of Houston. Mr. Trump praised the relief efforts, saying he had seen a lot of love and happiness. The death toll from the storm has now reached 44.
12 British people have been arrested after police smashed an alleged drugs ring at the Spanish resort of Magaluf on the island of Mallorca. Police seized 3 kilos of high-purity cocaine and more than €100,000 in cash. It's understood the group was supplying drugs to partygoers on the island. Footage released by the Spanish Civil Guard showed officers carrying out the raid on a block of flats. They were armed with guns and protected by helmets and a helicopter flying overhead.
12 Britons were arrested alongside 2 other suspects from Spain and the Dominican Republic. The UK's National Crime Agency worked with Spanish police on the arrests.
The police searched a wardrobe and a car where cocaine was allegedly found wrapped in cling film bundles. 4 vehicles were seized during the raids. The series of dawn raids in Barcelona and Mallorca were part of Operation Tatum, launched following another drugs raid last July, which saw 4 British and Spanish people arrested and 4.8 kilograms of cocaine seized.
Well, with us this morning to review the papers are Anne Diamond and Asa Bennett. Good to see you both. Let's talk about North Korea. It looks like they've carried out a 6th missile test. Deeply concerning for us all.
100 kilotons, was that how it was? Up to 100 kilotons power? The tremors were felt in Tokyo, apparently. I think it's really frightening because, as your correspondent was saying, the big question now is how does America respond? And none of us really know.
We don't know, because in the last few weeks we've heard President Trump talking about any aggression from the North Koreans will be met with fire and fury. Pretty strong words then. So where does he go now?
I don't know.
Well, he's just going to have to rattle his sabre and see if he can go do more than that, in a sense, because...
You start to hope that all the millions and millions and millions of pounds and dollars that have been poured into anti-missile systems, supposedly the ones that we can fire up into the stratosphere and knock out any intercontinental ballistic missile before it actually reaches target, just hope they work.
Yes.
But the question is, what does North Korea want from all of this?
South Korea, is it?
To strut its stuff. Do we want South Korea? Yes.
Well, it is said that the long-term objective is that they want South Korea. They want a united Korea again. And the only way they feel they'll ever be able to maybe have enough might to muster an ordinary war, if there is such a thing, is to at least have the backbone of a nuclear capability.
Yeah, Asa, for a deeply secretive country, you know, they love flexing their muscles when it comes to showing off their military might.
Well, absolutely. I think that's why President Trump's been so easy to provoke in this, because they can talk big, and so can he. And so as a result, it's sort of, the rhetoric just keeps going higher and higher.
But do you remember in the election when Hillary Clinton said the danger of President Trump is that you've got a man who can be provoked by a tweet now has his finger on the nuclear button, and hey presto, we're already there.
Yeah, two unpredictable world leaders, so we'll have to see how this all plays out, because it's going to affect all of us. Let's move on to this story, which is in the Observer on page 2, a story that we've been covering here on Sky News for the last couple of days, actually, this conflict in Myanmar.
Yes, and it's absolutely, well, Jacob Judah has a very sobering report in the Observer from the border on the sort of the exodus of the Rohingya population. Tens of thousands in the last month are estimated to have been fleeing to Bangladesh because the government in Myanmar doesn't recognise the Rohingya. It's basically launching in all intents and purposes of sort of persecution of them. I mean, the president of Turkey has referred to what's going on right now as almost a genocide, right, as going forward, as they're trying to break through to, you know, a place that might accept them in a sense. At the same point, the border posts are there for in Myanmar. They're sort of keeping them out, and there's all these utterly sort of heartbreaking sort of little details that Sir Jacob pulls out in terms of tales like men of, you know, military age, adult age, being indiscriminately killed, and children being ripped from the arms of their mothers. I mean, and the utterly sort of sobering final line is just pointing out that actually for people, what really upsets them most is that the international community can do nothing really but criticise.
And real pressure on Aung San Suu Kyi as well.
And let's pick on the story about Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson. It's got this headline, "Better off with Boris."
I know, isn't
really?
this interesting? This is based on a poll from pollsters Survation, who they make the point here in the Mail that they were the only opinion pollsters to correctly predict the outcome of the last general election.
Well done
so
to them.
We should eat them. And according to their poll, yeah, we would prefer Boris to Theresa May. And actually, in number 2 position, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's really coming up
He is so
from
popular.
behind, isn't
Somerset,
he?
of course.
Yeah. Yes. 2 old Etonians,
What's
suddenly.
his son called? Sixtus, isn't it?
He's got amazing names for his sons. But actually, what you've got there, although they've got this sort of public school background, which we had perceived that we didn't want again, you've got 2 real characters there. And I think after Cameron and after May, we really do want somebody with a bit of character.
Identifiable, I suppose, isn't it?
Asa, I mean, Brexit is your speciality. We hear conflicting reports about what the Europeans feel towards Boris Johnson. Some saying that, you know, he's a foreign secretary, so he's a man that we have to deal with. Others saying that he appears to be a bit of a joke. Yeah,
well, some sensitive types seem to think of him as the kind of mocking face of Brexit, and that he's, you know, was the man who, with his charisma and star power, persuaded Britain to vote leave, in a sense. He was much more friendly to the nation than other figures like Nigel Farage. He was more of a vote winner. And at the same point, we have to get away from... We need to remember one thing. He is still able to be witty, you know, charming. He has intelligence, and that's what obviously serves Britain greatly with this. And it comes through to why he's so popular.
And can he charm the Europeans going into the negotiations?
Well, it's David Davis who has to do the negotiations himself.
Well, absolutely,
Brexit,
right there.
his diplomats.
Yes.
So, you know, Boris, in the meantime, I think he's having to sell the Brexit deal to the nation. And actually, it's very interesting on leadership, what he actually says. The sort of, I'm going to do some Borisology on what he actually, his wording. That he backs Theresa May, you know, unequivocally. But he always says, you know, we have to get Brexit right. He doesn't say, you know, until 2022, I want Theresa May there.